Okay. Well, first, I would like to thank Francisco for the invitation to be presenting something from the research here, and to apologize, you guys, because I will be probably reading. Otherwise, I feel a bit insecure to speak freely. Well, I'm trying to talk about the idea of understandings of autism and what I call local arrangements of care, which is something that, I'll explain along the presentation, but it's something that is about how people, either professionals, families, or autistics themselves, how they get to go along through territories and find care and services and access rights. So I call that local arrangements of care. So these are some ethnographic reflections. As Clarice explained, we are a team of 3. Clara is not here. And we have as a kind of focus in this collaborative research. And right now I am in the last year of my doctoral study, so I'm dealing with transcriptions, analysis, and extensive readings of raw fieldwork materials. So maybe things will be a bit fuzzy here because it's still something that comes from raw data. But the focus of our collaborative research is to identify within the Brazilian public health system and other public systems that are outside the scope of the SUS, such as Moamiga, how different rationales about autism that sustain types of a system, that design types of a system, are in fact contributing to social inclusion of people with autism. Because at the end, after a treatment, what you expect is that that person can have a more fulfilling life and participate more in society. So, okay. Autism contested understandings and misunderstandings. This is, I just made a quick organization of something that Benilton, Rossano, and Clarice already told about. There's this kind of a debate, a kind of division in what we could call the autism field of care. On one side you have parents associations and that have an idea that autism, they defend the idea that autism is a form of disability. They demand specialized services in exclusive and secluded settings sometimes. In general, they approach autism as a diagnosis-driven way, and they demand evidence-based structure techniques. For example, ABA is one they call evidence-based. And on the other side, you have public mental health ethos in general, and that approach autism as a form of mental suffering, mental disorder, but more as a suffering. And they offer community-based universal access services. They are not diagnosis-driven, and they are not secluded. Okay. Better? Okay. They are not secluded settings with only autism being attended there. And they take what we call territorial approaches, which is a community-based services, but that goes beyond and also works in articulation with other services in a given territory. So, social inclusion, as I said, is a major concern in public policy agenda, but what we perceive is that there's not much consensus on the type of assistance that should be provided as a means to achieve such inclusion. So, and we think that part of this disagreement is due to these distinct rationales that each side of this debate sustain. That's why I said misunderstandings, because they don't understand each other very well either. They sustain different emic views on autism, disability, and mental disorders. And also their perceptions of what should be social inclusion is also a bit different from each other. But this situation here that is very well, that is clean and clear and easy to understand, one side is this way and the other side is that way, things get to be very fuzzy when it comes to real life and territories of care. So in these local worlds, this polarized national debates, it assumes like a blurry contour. You don't know exactly who is in which side, or if there are in fact sides. And so let's see from a territorial approach. So what I think is quite useful and a good collaboration from ethnographic research is that it can reveal how discourses and practice within a specific territory and among local arrangements of care can produce understandings of autism that might challenge or complexify this polarized and artificially organized debate. So the concept of territory, Benilton talked and Rossano talked about it, but I will recover that here, is central to interventions on public health in Brazil. It refers not only to a geographic area of intervention, but also to the idea that every individual is part of a community, and it is located in a certain social-political space. It encompasses the affective dimension and the social bonds and cultural values, so it's really attached to context. And people live this territory from their own perspectives, because it's one thing is when you are, for example, my territory I will present in the next slide, is a city, industrial city nearby Rio. It's a very important economic area, but with huge social disparities. One thing is when you inhabit this territory as, for example, a white male person. And the other thing is when you inhabit that territory, the same territory, as a black poor woman. That is totally changes the experience of that place. So it's not only the place, but how the place responds to you too. And how the place responds with its institutions, culture, and how can the subjects can access those services. So what I'm calling a territorial practice of care is not me, it's just, it's Brazilian public health system, means that the healthcare providers are supposed to know and interact with services users at the level of their everyday lives, using local resources and knowledges, sharing decisions on health and rights with the community. And it's in this idea is embedded the idea of social participation and social control. So the population also has this reciprocity in the process. And it also interacts, when you think of territorial healthcare, interacts with other sectors, just like education, social assistance, justice, and so on. It's quite common in primary care level and also in Brazilian psychiatric reform. It's like an important way to structure things. And this is the area where I was doing field work. Well, oops, sorry. It's this one. We are here, and just to locate you guys from what Clarice was talking, Pavuna is here, and Duque de Caxias, which is another city, is all this red area here. As you can see, is quite big. For you guys to have an idea, the airport from where you arrived is here. So it's far from Rio, not exactly far, but it's not easy to get there. And in terms of geography, downtown is here, right in this part. So people who live in that area have very much trouble to access services. Things are kind of centralized here. They have, of course, schools and basic units of health around the territory, But for example, in terms of autism, if you want to address your child to a service that can, take care of him, you have to go to downtown Caxias. So it's far. Other things that are written here about the area is something like 16,000 square miles and a population of almost 900,000 people. It's a lot of people. And economically it's an important city in the country, in the whole country, because it's the 22nd gross domestic product in the national rank. But in terms of Human Development Index, that's the position in national rank. I don't know how to say that in English, 1,574th position. So in terms of generate richness to the country, it's 22nd, but in terms of quality of life of population, it's down there. And also it has the third largest oil refinery in Brazil, very productive and with all the problems of having an oil refinery in territory, and also the largest landfill in South America, recently deactivated, not exactly deactivated. So it's not, how do you say, it's quite a hostile territory. It's not beautiful, it's hot, it doesn't have leisure activities whatsoever, and living conditions are not good. Transportation is also a challenge, so it's a hard territory to be an autistic. Let me see what I have here. So it's a place marked by huge inequalities, and despite the strategic economic power, the city faces major challenges when it comes to social issues like poverty, violence, unemployment, insufficiency of health and social services. And this insufficiency is not that they don't have the services, they do have, but it lacks funding, it lacks personnel, staff, sometimes lacks material resources. And the rural area is that area that is much far. It has a rural area. It's such a big place that has a rural area. And people who live there, they have some difficulty to access services and transportation. So the next one, what are the profiles of the services that where I did my field work? So my field site were two distinct public institutional settings that assist children and youth with autism, but not exclusively. They have a multiple people approach. Both of them work with a community-based perspective aiming social inclusion, and they share this same territory. They are located in downtown, and they are in the same street, so they are very close to each other. One of them is part of the mental health sector and is in fact a CAPC that Rossano talked about yesterday. It's specialized in infant and youth psychosocial attention, and it's the only one in that territory. And the other, and it deals with autism from that epistemological idea of mental disorder, mental suffering. And the other one is connected to the field of inclusive education and treats autism as a disability. This place is not part of the Brazilian Unified Health System. It's connected to education and sports. And it's a fundação municipal. It's a city foundation. It's something that is from local initiative, because it's a city with a lot of money. And they have this foundation there that offers public and free services. And this unit is specialized with people with disabilities. And recently they have made a kind of, how do you say, convenio? An agreement with the Special Olympic organization. So there are a lot of users that are now athletes at the Special Olympic Games. And one of them recently went to Korea. You know, the guy has never been to Copacabana, but he went to Korea to play soccer. You know? And he has intellectual disability. So they also do, because they have this educational inclusive approach, they have like a clinical support to autism, but they don't call it clinical, but it looks clinical. They have training courses like cooking assistants and computers. And they also try to integrate people with disability within labor market. So there are two very distinct profiles of institutions. And my fieldwork activities were participant observations in these institutions. And when I say participant observation, I can say that I did much more participant part. In fact, a lot. From playing basketball to, I don't know, cooking cakes with them, and I don't know. And I also interviewed professionals and families of service users, and did some ethnography of events related to this area and autism in general. So, as I said, I will focus on the understandings of autism in these local arrangements of care. And I'll take as the basis for this reflection some narratives of autism that emerged from this territory, taking from interviews, from informal conversations, and so on, and were used to portray. What interested to me is that they were used to portray a certain way of being a person, a way of being a child or an adult with autism, or a way of being a person who is a relative of someone with autism in that local world. And as a baseline for this, I will use the answers they gave me to this question. The question that was part of our interview, but whenever I had the chance, I asked them. So if you had to explain to someone who has no idea what autism is, what would you say? How would you explain autism to that person? Another thing that I did not mention, but I described the territory briefly, but I did not describe the people who live there. They have, most of people, of course they have social, they have a middle class there, and even people with a lot of money living in Caxias, but most of the users of these services are people from very low socioeconomic strata, with not much access to education, and several of these families had important impacts on their lives after they had a child with autism, because most of times the mothers had to stop working to take care of the kids, and this impacted their lives negatively. So that was the question I made, and what I did, I took some answers and tried to put them all together. I don't know if you can get to read this, but if you don't, I'll read for you guys. So this is the universe of answers I had, if they had to say what autism is. So here we have a mental health issue, mental disorder, atypical development, relational difficulties, developmental issues, behavior disorder, a disability, a PDD, a pervasive development disorder, and a special child. Of course, you can see from here, I don't know if you can see from here, but this side of these answers, they come from professionals and people who work in the mental health area. And this side of the answers come from those professionals from the inclusive educational area. And here in the middle, it's like how the parents and grandmothers and sisters and everybody talked about, most of them. They use other words too, but special child is something that came up like very naturally, very quickly. It was the first way they had to explain what autism is. So, as we can see, in this local world, it's hard to identify the sharp and polarized view of the national debate. You know, those schism between parents, advocacy groups, sustaining a disability perspective, and then mental health workers. No, this is all a bit blurry. And generally speaking, as I said, I already said that. And then they said, these parents, they say, oh, this autism, a child with autism is a special child. But what do they mean when they say it's a special child? Oh dear. In the broader sense, special, in Portuguese, especial, when we say special child, criança especial, is a common but very controversial term in disability lexicon. In common sense, it's an euphemistic way of portraying people with disability, especially people with intellectual disability. This is a use normally made by non-disabled person addressing or talking about people with disability. And what is problematic about that? Because it's supposed, because of its euphemistic way to portray disability, it hides something that is considered shameful or unpleasant. So it's important to address this because it does not reduce the stigma, it even enhances the stigma and reinforces, which is worse, reinforces an ableist perspective. But when you use special alone, there's no problem because it can address needs. People have special needs and it's okay, no problem. And also a field of pedagogy that should address these educational needs, these special educational needs. Usually in Brazil, when you talk about special education, people immediately think about disability, but it is a wider, because it doesn't address disability, it addresses special needs. So you can talk that people that can be served by this kind of field of expertise range from people with disability to indigenous people to people living in conditions that educational settings are challenged, like for example children living chronically in hospitals. So this is the field of special education. And also, but of course when it's used, especially it's used as a qualifier to a person, it becomes problematic and it's something that the field of disability studies in Brazil and the movement of disability rights, they are very critical about this kind of approach. You should not address a person with disability as a special person or as a special child. They are very vocal about that. But in that local setting of care, there was special children everywhere. They would talk about autism using this word a lot. So what I understood is that in that context, it worked as a protective badge. And I found funny that you used the word badge in that example of the boy from Complexo do Alemão. It was a tool that mobilized empathy in negotiations within local power arrangements. It complexified notions of empowerment and expertise in disability local politics, not this big politics, but this local politics of things. So I met this in fieldwork, some parents with this concern, for example, to differentiate autism from any mental disorder. This is a part of an answer of a mother when she was invited to take part in the celebration of the anti-asylum movement day, which is April 18th. And she got furious. You know, she says, what? Anti-asylum fight? You mean mental asylum stuff? Manicomio stuff? I am not going. Do you think my son is crazy? She was furious. He's not crazy. He's a special child. He's autistic and has nothing to do with madness and mental asylum and madhouse things. This is for crazy people. My son is not crazy. So the idea of a special child is someone that doesn't carry the stigma of mental illness or better, of madness. And this is something that they find important to not let the child get the wrong stigma. So he's a special child, he's not a mad child. And although her son was attended in a mental health facility in Capsi, she doesn't relate that place with the idea of madness and mental asylum. In fact, nothing in that place reminds a madhouse. But as soon as the word anti-manicomial, anti-asylum, and manicomio came up in the conversation, her reaction was to make this sharp distinction, saying this has nothing to do with my child. So I'm going to jump for the next, and then we just debate the cases. So this is another situation where these parents, in fact mothers, was a group of mothers talking about. They were demanding a meeting with local mayor to discuss the implementation of a specialized center to attend only autistic children. And they were really upset because they thought that as mothers of special children, they had the right to access, directly local politicians, because as we know our rights, the mayor must meet with us. This is about our kids' rights. So to be a mother of a special child puts those women as in a certain position to approach citizenship and to claim very strongly. And I was thinking, if they were not presenting themselves as mothers of special children, they would never ever be heard, because they were poor black women from favelas, and they were like the ones that are more invisible in their citizenship conditions. Okay, just the next one. This is another situation. I was talking to a mother, and when I asked her, she said that, well, autism is not in his face. If you look at him, and her son is about 11 years old, you wouldn't tell he's different, but he is. So I tell people that he's a special child, and then they don't get judgmental about him. Because she was telling that, because in that day when she arrived there, she was waiting for the bus, for the second bus to get her to the place, and the bus was late, and it was summer, it was hot, it was a scorching sun, and they were waiting under the sun, and the bus stop was full of people, and the boy started to get impatient and very annoyed. After a few minutes, that was taking longer than it used to be, he started to get agitated and, flapping hands, steaming, and it did not work because, the sensorial overload kept happening. And after a while, he started to beat her and try to bite her and getting really disruptive. And she said that in that moment, people were looking at them in a very negative way, like trying to get away from her. And she said, well, my son, he is a special child. And the moment she said that, the way those people in the bus stop were there, like being judgmental, they totally changed it. Somebody offered some water, another one said, okay, do you want to sit around here? And when the bus finally arrived, they managed a way for her to be the first one to enter in the bus, and it caused empathy, it changed the environment. So I don't think there's nothing euphemistic about it. And this one is the more dramatic one. Don't shoot, please, he's a special kid. It's a case that happened, exactly the same type of situation that you talked about in Complexo do Alemão. It happened in Caxias with one boy, he's 14 years old. He lives alone with his grandmother, and he's a non-verbal autist. He's a very agitated, and he has this habit of running away. When you see it, he just left. And they live in a favela, which is a very complex and sometimes dangerous territory. And in that day, they were having police operations in the community. So she said that the boy was running rampantly, barefoot, through an alley at the favela when he suddenly entered in the area of the police operation. These words that I put here were shouted, desperately shouted by the owner of a small grocery shop in the corner that saw the scene and looked at the police officers that were holding guns to the boy, screaming, don't shoot, because the boy did not attend the police order to stop. He kept running. So the next action would be shoot him down. And it was a black kid, barefoot, running, disturbed with bizarre behavior. and who was disobeying commands, so he could easily be in the middle of a crossing fire. So he could be easily misunderstood as either a drug dealer running away, or a crack user, a drug abuser, who are kinds of people whose lives are not so much valuable in these situations, in these violent situations. So what this woman says is that the importance of living in that area for such a long time, that everybody, even the man from the grocery shop, knows his history. It was one of those persons who helped to get his security, so this is how the environment, even hostile, she relies on people. And the explanation, the quick explanation to the police officer that don't shoot, it's a special kid. Because if he's autistic, maybe it could not make the same effect, but special kids said it all, it just made the change in the behavior. And, okay, the last one. So this is just to recall why I got so interested about and obsessed about this special child as an enabling autistic personhood in that local area of because it explains behaviors. It gives visibility to a hidden disability. It distincts from very stigmatized identities, like mad people, which I don't think is exactly good or bad, but anyway. It protects from violence. It's a matter of survival sometimes. It gives support and empathy and values the ability of children because, for example, in the case of that boy who was, melting down in the bus stop, once he started to be seen as just a special kid, a different boy, he got to calm down and people could even, like he carries a small ball, colorful ball, and he could even play with his abilities, his way of relating could appear. It also enables some status for the families to have local political action, which is not exactly advocacy, but I think it's a first step. And because it facilitates for a more organized approach to advocacy. So these are my contributions to the event.